when 381 Navy SEALs found themselves surrounded by enemy forces in a valley that had become their tomb. Command had written them off as casualties. The terrain was too dangerous, the enemy too entrenched, and conventional rescue operations simply impossible. But one person refused to accept that 381 American heroes would die that day. Her name was Captain Delaney Thomas, a 26-year-old A-10 Thunderbolt pilot from Ireland, who everyone said was too emotional, too reckless, and too inexperienced for real combat missions. What happened next would shatter every assumption about what one determined pilot could accomplish when 381 lives hung in the balance. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The morning sun cast long shadows across Kandahar Airbase as Captain Delaney Thomas completed her third pre-flight inspection of the day. At 0630 hours on what promised to be another scorching Afghan morning, she stood beside her A-10 Thunderbolt II, running her hands along the aircraft's titanium armor plating with the practiced touch of someone who understood that attention to detail meant the difference between life and death. Delaney was 26 years old, though her youthful face and slight build made her appear younger. Born in Dublin and raised in Cork, she carried herself with the quiet intensity that marked those who had something to prove. Her red hair was always pulled back in a regulation bun, but a few rebellious strands inevitably escaped to frame her green eyes that missed nothing and forgot even less. Standing barely 5'4" and weighing 125 pounds, Delaney looked almost comically small next to the massive A-10 Warthog. The aircraft was a flying tank designed for one purpose: close air support. Its 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon could tear through enemy armor like paper, and its ability to absorb punishment was legendary. But for all its fearsome reputation, the A-10 required a pilot with surgical precision and nerves of steel to be truly effective. Delaney possessed both qualities in abundance, though her squadron mates seemed to notice only her perceived weaknesses. Her Irish accent became more pronounced when she was stressed or hangry, which happened frequently during briefings where her suggestions were politely dismissed. Her emotional responses to mission planning, her visible frustration when civilian casualties were deemed acceptable, or her insistence on double-checking intelligence reports had earned her a reputation as someone who let feelings cloud her judgment. "Thomas, you're not flying today," came the familiar voice of Major Rick Sanderson as he approached her aircraft. Sanderson was everything Delaney wasn't: tall, broad-shouldered, and possessed of the easy confidence that came from never having to prove his worth. He'd been flying A-10s for 12 years and commanded the 74th Fighter Squadron with the kind of casual authority that brooked no argument. "Sir, my bird's ready and I'm on the rotation schedule," Delaney replied, not looking up from her inspection checklist. She learned to keep her voice level during these conversations, though inside she felt the familiar burn of frustration. "Change of plans. We've got a formation flight with the new pilots from the 23rd. I need experienced hands in the air, not someone who might get emotional under pressure." Sanderson's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather rather than grounding one of his pilots based on gender stereotypes. Delaney finally looked up, her green eyes flashing with barely controlled anger. "Major, I've logged more combat hours than half the pilots you're putting up today. My targeting accuracy is in the top 5% of the squadron, and I've never missed a close air support call when it mattered." "That's not the point, Thomas. The 23rd pilots need to see how real Air Force pilots handle formation flying. They need steady leadership, not someone who might lose her composure if things get complicated." Sanderson turned to leave, then paused. "Besides, we need someone to coordinate the ground maintenance schedule. Your attention to detail makes you perfect for logistics support." There it was again, logistics support. The same dead-end assignment that had claimed so many promising military careers. Delaney watched Sanderson walk away, his dismissal hanging in the air like exhaust fumes. Around her, other pilots were beginning their own pre-flight routines, getting ready for the kind of mission she'd trained for, but was never quite deemed ready to handle. What Sanderson and the others didn't know was that Delaney had been preparing for something much bigger than formation flights with rookie pilots. For the past 8 months, she'd been studying close air support tactics with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She'd memorized the specifications of every enemy weapons system in the theater, could identify friendly forces by their movement patterns alone, and even learned basic Pashto to better communicate with local allies. Her fellow pilots saw her dedication as evidence of insecurity, proof that she was trying too hard to compensate for her obvious limitations. They couldn't understand that she was preparing for the moment when someone's life would depend on her skills, her knowledge, and her absolute refusal to accept that any mission was impossible. As she watched the selected pilots taxi toward the runway, Delaney made her way toward the operations center to accept her logistics assignment. But first, she stopped by the intelligence section to review the morning briefings. She might not be flying today, but she could still prepare for tomorrow. After all, in her experience, tomorrow had a way of arriving when you least expected it.
The operations briefing room buzzed with the controlled chaos of a military unit preparing for combat operations. Delaney sat in the back row, her notebook open as she dutifully recorded equipment assignments and maintenance schedules. Around her, the real pilots, as Major Sanderson had made clear, discussed flight plans, target priorities, and the kind of complex tactical decisions that she was apparently too emotional to handle. Captain Jake Morrison, Sanderson's second-in-command, stood at the front of the room updating the squadron on recent intelligence reports. His voice carried the easy authority of someone who'd never been questioned about his fitness for command. Enemy activity has increased significantly in the Korangal Valley over the past week. We're seeing coordinated movements that suggest a major operation is in planning stages. Delaney's pen stopped moving. She'd been tracking the same intelligence patterns and had reached a different conclusion. The enemy wasn't planning an operation, they were already executing one. The movement pattern suggested a systematic effort to cut off and isolate forward operating bases, creating kill zones where conventional rescue operations would be impossible. She raised her hand. Captain Morrison, has anyone considered that these movements might indicate a trap rather than preparation? The pattern suggests they're trying to lure our forces into a prepared ambush. The room fell silent. Morrison's expression shifted from professional attention to barely concealed irritation. Thomas, you're here to track equipment, not to analyze intelligence. Leave the tactical assessments to the people actually flying the missions. Heat rose in Delaney's cheeks, and she felt her accent thicken as her emotions engaged. With respect, sir, I've been studying these patterns for weeks. The enemy is using our own response protocols against us. They know we'll send rescue forces if they isolate our people, and they're preparing to— That's enough, Major Sanderson interrupted from the front of the room. Thomas, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but operational planning requires experience that you simply don't have. Focus on your assigned duties. The dismissal hit like a physical blow. Around her, other pilots exchanged glances that ranged from sympathetic to amused. She caught Captain Lisa Rodriguez, one of the few other women in the squadron, looking at her with something that might have been pity. She'd survived in this environment by never challenging the established order, by accepting her role and never pushing for more. After the briefing, Delaney found herself walking alongside Rodriguez toward the maintenance hangar. You know they're not going to listen to you, right? Rodriguez said quietly. I learned a long time ago that the best way to survive here is to do your job and not make waves. But what if I'm right? What if there are people out there who are going to die because we're too stubborn to consider intelligence from someone who isn't part of the boys' club? Rodriguez stopped walking and turned to face her. Then they die, and you move on. That's the job, Delaney. We're not here to save the world. We're here to follow orders and support the mission as defined by people who outrank us. I can't accept that. I became a pilot to make a difference, not to count spare parts while other people make the decisions that matter. Then you're going to have a very frustrating career, Rodriguez said, not unkindly. Look, I get it. When I first got here, I thought I could change things too. But the system is what it is. You can fight it and destroy yourself, or you can work within it, and maybe, eventually, earn enough respect to have your voice heard. Delaney wanted to argue, but she could see the exhaustion in Rodriguez's eyes. This was a woman who had fought the same battles and had chosen survival over principle. It was a rational choice, perhaps even the smart choice, but it wasn't one that Delaney could make. That afternoon, while conducting her assigned inventory duties, Delaney overheard a conversation between two maintenance chiefs that made her blood run cold. Word from command is that Special Operations has teams operating in some pretty hairy areas. If any of those boys get into trouble, we might not be able to get them out. "What do you mean?" asked his companion. "The terrain, the enemy positioning, it's all wrong for conventional rescue operations. Command is basically acknowledging that some of our people might be on their own if things go sideways." Delaney felt her stomach clench. This was exactly what she'd tried to warn about in the briefing. The enemy was creating situations where American forces would be isolated and vulnerable, counting on the fact that traditional rescue doctrine would be inadequate to the challenge. She thought about saying something, about taking her concerns up the chain of command, but she already knew what would happen. She'd be told to stay in her lane, to focus on her assigned duties, to leave the serious thinking to the people who were qualified to do it. Instead, she returned to her quarters that evening and pulled out the tactical studies she'd been working on in her spare time. If command wouldn't listen to her warnings, she could at least prepare for the moment when those warnings proved prophetic. Because in her gut, she knew that moment was coming. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative.
While the rest of the squadron slept, Delaney Thomas was wide awake in the flight simulator at 0300 hours. The facility was officially closed, but she'd learned to bypass the security protocols weeks ago, a skill picked up during her electronics training at the Air Force Academy. The darkened simulator bay hummed with the quiet efficiency of machines that never needed rest, much like the woman who operated them in the pre-dawn hours when no one was watching. Tonight's scenario was her own creation, a close air support mission in mountainous terrain with multiple friendly units pinned down by superior enemy forces. She'd programmed in weather conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Low visibility, crosswinds, and the kind of terrain that turned routine sorties into nightmares. The virtual cockpit of her A-10 felt as real as the aircraft sitting on the tarmac outside, every switch and gauge positioned exactly where muscle memory expected to find them. "Falcon Base, this is Thunderbolt 7 requesting immediate close air support," came the voice through her headset. She'd recorded the calls herself, using voice modulation software to create realistic radio chatter from fictional ground units. "We have 300-plus friendly personnel surrounded in Grid Square Tango 7-4. Enemy positions are danger close. We need precision strikes or we're not making it out." Delaney's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. She'd run variations of this scenario 47 times over the past 3 months, each iteration designed to push her skills beyond what any training manual required. Her targeting solutions had to be perfect. The margin for error when friendlies were danger close was measured in meters, not kilometers. The simulator's threat warning system screamed as surface-to-air missiles locked onto her aircraft. Standard doctrine called for immediate evasive maneuvers, but Delaney had developed her own approach. Instead of breaking off the attack run, she used the A-10's superior maneuverability to thread between the missile threats while maintaining target acquisition. It was dangerous, arguably reckless, but it kept her weapons trained on the enemy positions that were threatening the surrounded friendlies. Her first pass eliminated the primary anti-aircraft positions. Her second run targeted the enemy command post, using the A-10's GAU-8 cannon with surgical precision. By the third pass, she'd created an escape corridor wide enough for the surrounded forces to break out of the encirclement. "Thunderbolt 7, this is Falcon Base," came her own voice through the speakers, shifted to sound like a grateful ground commander. "That was the finest display of close air support I've ever witnessed. You just saved 300 lives." Delaney powered down the simulator and sat in the darkness for a moment, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the virtual mission. 300 lives. The number wasn't arbitrary. It represented the approximate strength of a special operations task force, the kind of unit that operated in the most dangerous areas of Afghanistan with minimal support and maximum risk. She'd been studying special operations deployment patterns for months, using her security clearance to access mission reports and after-action reviews. What she'd discovered troubled her deeply. Special ops teams were being deployed into increasingly isolated positions, often without adequate air support coverage. The official explanation was that these units were highly trained and capable of operating independently, but Delaney saw a different pattern emerging. The enemy was learning to exploit gaps in American air support doctrine. They were positioning themselves in terrain that made traditional close air support difficult or impossible, then systematically isolating American forces in areas where help couldn't reach them. It was a strategy that relied on American commanders following their own rules, even when those rules led to disaster. Delaney pulled out a detailed map of Afghanistan that she'd been marking with colored pins for weeks. Red pins marked enemy activity. Blue pins showed American bases and deployment areas. Yellow pins indicated areas where terrain made air support challenging. The pattern that emerged was chilling. The enemy was systematically creating kill zones where American forces could be trapped and eliminated without effective air support. She'd tried to present this analysis to her superiors, but her warnings had been dismissed as the overactive imagination of someone desperate to prove herself. Major Sanderson had actually laughed when she'd suggested that the enemy was sophisticated enough to develop counter-air strategies. "Thomas," he said, "you're giving these people way too much credit. They're not tactical geniuses, they're just terrorists with rifles." But Delaney knew better. She'd studied the enemy's tactics in detail, had analyzed their movement patterns and engagement strategies. These weren't random attacks by indisciplined insurgents. They were coordinated operations by an enemy that had learned to turn American strengths against them. Her preparation went beyond studying maps and running simulations. She'd also been developing new targeting techniques that pushed the boundaries of what the A-10 was designed to do. The aircraft was built for close air support, but Delaney had discovered ways to use its weapon systems for precision strikes that exceeded the aircraft's official specifications. Working with maintenance crews during her off-duty hours, she'd learned to modify targeting solutions in real time, adjusting for atmospheric conditions and terrain features that weren't accounted for in standard procedures. She'd memorized the ballistic characteristics of every weapon in the A-10's arsenal and could calculate firing solutions manually if the aircraft's targeting systems failed. Most importantly, she'd developed the kind of situational awareness that separated good pilots from legendary ones. She could identify friendly forces by their movement patterns, could distinguish between enemy positions and civilian structures from altitude, and had learned to read terrain in ways that turned obstacles into opportunities.
The morning briefing on September 15th should have been routine. Intelligence reports indicated moderate enemy activity in the southern provinces, and the day's flight schedule included standard reconnaissance and patrol missions. Delaney sat in her usual spot in the back of the briefing room, expecting another day of equipment inventory and maintenance coordination. What she didn't expect was to watch her squadron prepare for the kind of mission she'd been training for in secret. Major Sanderson stood at the front of the room, his expression more serious than usual as he addressed the assembled pilots. "Gentlemen and ladies," he added with a glance toward Delaney and Captain Rodriguez, "we've received a priority tasking from Special Operations Command.
Operation Granite Shield is a coordinated search and destroy mission targeting high-value enemy assets in the Coringo Valley. The room buzzed with excitement. This was the kind of mission that pilots joined the Air Force to fly. Direct action in support of Special Operations Forces with the kind of tactical complexity that separated elite units from routine military formations. Delaney felt her pulse quicken as Sanderson continued the briefing. The mission profile calls for precision strikes against fortified positions in mountainous terrain. Enemy forces are well-equipped with surface-to-air missiles and have established overlapping fields of fire that will make this extremely challenging. I need my most experienced pilots for this operation. Captain Morrison stepped forward to outline the tactical situation. Intelligence indicates approximately 200 enemy fighters have established defensive positions along 3 ridge lines. Our job is to neutralize these positions in support of a SEAL team insertion that will commence immediately after our strikes. Delaney's mind raced as she processed the mission parameters. This was exactly the scenario she'd been preparing for. Mountainous terrain, precision targeting requirements, and the kind of close coordination with Special Operations Forces that demanded split-second timing and surgical accuracy. Her hands started to rise, ready to volunteer her expertise, but Sanderson's next words stopped her cold. Morrison, you're flight lead. Take Walker, Henderson, and Kowalski with you. 4 birds should be sufficient for the target set. He turned to address the rest of the squadron. The rest of you will maintain standard patrol rotations. Thomas, I need you to coordinate with maintenance to ensure our birds are properly configured for the mission loadout. The dismissal was casual, almost offhand, but it hit Delaney like a physical blow. She was being assigned to equipment coordination while her squadron flew the most important mission they'd seen in months. Around her, the selected pilots were already discussing tactics and contingencies for a mission that perfectly matched her months of preparation, a mission she could contribute to significantly if given the chance. Instead, she would spend the day ensuring that their aircraft were properly loaded with weapons while they flew into combat without her. "Sir," Delaney said, raising her voice enough to cut through the tactical discussions, "I'd like to volunteer for the mission. My training scores in mountainous terrain operations are—" "Thomas, we've discussed this," Sanderson interrupted, his tone carrying the kind of patient exasperation reserved for children who refuse to understand simple concepts. "This mission requires pilots with extensive combat experience. You're not ready for this level of complexity." "With respect, sir, I've logged over 300 hours in combat zones. My accuracy ratings in precision targeting exceed—" "Your accuracy ratings in training scenarios. There's a significant difference between shooting at stationary targets on a range and engaging enemy forces that are shooting back. This mission is too important to risk on someone who's never been tested under real combat pressure." The words stung because they contained just enough truth to be devastating. Delaney had indeed never been in a sustained firefight, had never had to maintain target acquisition while enemy missiles were tracking her aircraft, but she'd also never been given the chance to prove herself in those situations because her superiors had decided she wasn't ready for them. Captain Rodriguez leaned over from her seat nearby. "Delaney, sometimes it's better to wait for the right opportunity than to push for something you're not ready for. Let them handle this mission, and maybe next time—" "Next time what? Next time they'll suddenly decide I'm experienced enough? How do I get experience if I'm never allowed to participate in the missions that provide it?" Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "That's just how the system works. You have to prove yourself gradually, build trust over time." But Delaney had been proving herself gradually for 18 months without seeing any change in how she was perceived by her commanding officers. She watched Morrison's flight plan take shape on the tactical display, a complex, multi-axis attack that would require precise timing and coordination. She could see flaws in their approach, inefficiencies that could be corrected with better understanding of the terrain features she'd studied obsessively. "Sir," she tried once more, "I've analyzed the target area extensively. The terrain features in Grid Square Lima 7 present opportunities for—" "Thomas, that's enough." Sanderson's voice carried the sharp edge of command authority.
Your job is equipment coordination, not tactical planning. Focus on your assigned duties and let the experienced pilots handle the mission planning. The briefing continued around her, but Delaney had stopped listening. She watched her squadron mates discuss strategies and contingencies for a mission that perfectly matched her months of preparation, a mission she could contribute to significantly if given the chance. Instead, she would spend the day ensuring that their aircraft were properly loaded with weapons while they flew into combat without her. As the briefing concluded and pilots headed toward their aircraft, Delaney remained seated, staring at the tactical display that showed the mountain terrain she knew better than anyone in the room. Today, her knowledge would remain unused, her skills untested, her preparation irrelevant. But as she watched the mission brief fade from the screen, she made a silent promise to herself. The next time American lives hung in balance, she would be ready to act, regardless of whether her superiors deemed her worthy of the opportunity.
2 weeks after Operation Granite Shield's successful completion, the whispers began. They started in the maintenance bay, spreading through the squadron like smoke from a damaged engine. Delaney first noticed the change when Chief Master Sergeant Williams asked her to re-verify weapons inventory counts she'd already confirmed twice. His tone carried an edge of suspicion that hadn't been there before. "Thomas, these numbers for the GAU-8 ammunition seem high," Williams said, tapping his clipboard with barely concealed irritation. "You sure you counted these correctly? Because if rounds are going missing, that's a security issue we can't ignore." Delaney had triple-checked those numbers. She always did. Her attention to detail was the one aspect of her performance that had never been questioned, until now. "Chief, I've verified those counts personally. The numbers are accurate. We received an unexpected resupply shipment last Tuesday that accounted for the increase." Williams studied her face as if searching for signs of deception. "Unexpected shipment that you happened to be present for. Convenient timing, don't you think?" The implication hung in the air like cordite after a weapons test. Delaney felt her cheeks flush as the meaning became clear. "Chief, are you suggesting I'm somehow involved in ammunition theft? Because if that's what you're implying—" "I'm not implying anything, Thomas. I'm just saying that these discrepancies started showing up around the same time you began spending extra hours in areas that aren't really your responsibility. Makes a person wonder what you're really doing during all those late-night equipment checks." The accusation was as unfair as it was devastating. Delaney's late-night hours were spent studying tactical manuals and running simulator training, activities that had nothing to do with weapons accountability. But she couldn't explain her actual activities without revealing the extent of her unauthorized preparation for missions she wasn't assigned to fly. The questioning intensified the following days. Captain Morrison began scrutinizing her maintenance reports with unusual thoroughness, questioning technical assessments that had previously been accepted without comment. During a routine briefing about aircraft readiness, he challenged her evaluation of an A-10's hydraulic system, an evaluation that subsequent inspection proved completely accurate. "Thomas, your report indicates this aircraft is fully mission capable, but you're not a certified technician. How can you be certain your evaluation is correct?" "Sir, I worked with Senior Airman Martinez to verify all systems. The aircraft meets all readiness standards for combat operations." Delaney kept her voice level despite the growing frustration that threatened to overwhelm our professional composure. "Martinez was conducting routine maintenance. You were observing and asking questions that went well beyond your assigned duties. Some people are wondering why a logistics specialist needs such detailed knowledge of weapon systems and targeting computers." The room fell silent. Other pilots and support staff exchanged glances that ranged from curiosity to concern. Delaney realized that her months of preparation, her efforts to expand her knowledge beyond the narrow confines of her assigned role, were being reinterpreted as something suspicious, even potentially dangerous. "I believe understanding our equipment makes me better at my job," she replied carefully. "If I know how systems work, I can better anticipate maintenance needs and ensure mission readiness." Major Sanderson entered the conversation with the kind of casual authority that made his words carry extra weight. "Thomas, that's admirable in theory, but we've noticed you spending considerable time studying materials that fall outside your area of responsibility. Tactical manuals, terrain analysis, special operations procedures, these aren't logistics functions." The net was tightening around her. Every hour she'd spent in preparation, Every manual she'd studied, every question she'd asked was being twisted into evidence of inappropriate ambition or worse. Her dedication was becoming a liability, her initiative reframed as insubordination. "Sir, I'm trying to be the best soldier I can be. If that means learning about aspects of our mission beyond my immediate duties, it means you're not focused on your actual responsibilities. We need logistics personnel who concentrate on logistics, not aspiring pilots who think they know better than their commanding officers." The words cut deep because they contained the ultimate dismissal. She was an aspiring pilot, not a real one. Despite her training, her qualifications, and her demonstrated competence, she was still seen as someone playing at being a military aviator rather than actually being one. Captain Rodriguez approached her after the briefing, her expression troubled. "Delaney, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you planning something? Because the way you've been acting, the extra study time, the technical questions, the tactical analysis, it's making people nervous." "Making people nervous about what?" Delaney asked, though she already knew the answer. "About whether you're planning to do something unauthorized, about whether you're planning to take matters into your own hands if you don't get the assignments you want." Rodriguez's voice carried genuine concern mixed with official caution. "Because if that's what this is about, you need to stop before you destroy your career entirely." Delaney looked at Rodriguez, seeing a fellow officer who had survived in this environment by accepting limitations and following rules. "What if the rules are wrong?" she asked quietly. "What if following procedures means people die when they could be saved?" "Then that's not your decision to make," Rodriguez replied firmly. "That's what command structure is for. You follow orders, you trust the system, and you don't try to be the hero in someone else's story." But as Delaney walked back to her quarters that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else's story was about to become hers, whether the chain of command approved or not.
The call to Major Sanderson's office came at 1400 hours on a Tuesday afternoon that had started with unusual calm. Delaney knocked on the doorframe exactly on time, her uniform pressed to regulation standards and her mind prepared for what she suspected would be a career-defining conversation. The office smelled of coffee and the kind of institutional authority that permeated every surface of military command spaces. "Enter," Sanderson's voice commanded. Delaney stepped inside to find herself facing not just her squadron commander, but also Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes from the Inspector General's office and Captain Rodriguez, who couldn't meet her eyes. The arrangement of chairs suggested this was less a meeting than a formal proceeding. "Sit down, Thomas," Sanderson said, gesturing to a chair positioned directly across from his desk. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding your conduct and focus over the past several months." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes opened a folder that Delaney recognized as her complete service record. Every efficiency report, every training score, every comment from supervisors had been compiled into a document that would determine her future in the Air Force. "Captain Thomas, you've been an exemplary soldier in many respects. Your technical knowledge is outstanding, your attention to detail is exceptional, and your dedication to duty is evident." The pause that followed carried the weight of an approaching "however" that would negate everything positive that had just been said. "However," Hayes continued, "there are growing concerns about the scope of your interests and activities. Multiple supervisors have reported that you've been studying materials and developing skills that extend well beyond your assigned duties as a logistics coordinator." Delaney felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. "Ma'am, I believe that understanding all aspects of our mission makes me a more effective officer. Knowledge of tactical procedures and aircraft capabilities directly supports my ability to—" "Your ability to do what exactly?" Sanderson interrupted. "Because your job description doesn't include tactical analysis, mission planning, or combat operations. Your job is to ensure that aircraft are properly maintained and equipped for missions that other people plan and execute." The reduction of her role to its most basic components felt like a deliberate diminishment of her worth as an officer. Captain Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in her chair, finally speaking up. "Delaney, we've also noticed that you've been spending considerable time in the flight simulator during off-duty hours. The access logs show you've logged more simulator time than some of our active combat pilots." "I'm maintaining my flight proficiency," Delaney replied, knowing how weak the justification sounded even as she spoke it. Regulation requires all qualified pilots to maintain minimum flight hours, and the simulator counts toward. You're not on the flight rotation, Hayes said bluntly. You haven't been assigned to active combat missions, so there's no requirement for you to maintain combat proficiency. The simulator time you've been logging suggests you're preparing for operations you're not authorized to conduct. The accusation hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. Delaney realized that her months of preparation were being interpreted as evidence of potential insubordination, possibly even planning for unauthorized action. Her dedication had become a threat to good order and discipline. Ma'am, I believe that understanding all aspects of our mission makes me a more effective officer. Knowledge of tactical procedures and aircraft capabilities directly supports my ability to— Your ability to do what exactly? Sanderson interrupted. Because your job description doesn't include tactical analysis, mission planning, or combat operations. Your job is to ensure that aircraft are properly maintained and equipped for missions that other people plan and execute. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. Captain Thomas, we need to be very clear about your role and responsibilities going forward. Effective immediately, your access to tactical manuals, mission planning documents, and flight simulators is restricted to those directly necessary for your assigned duties. The words hit like a physical blow. Delaney felt months of preparation and knowledge acquisition being stripped away by administrative fiat. Ma'am, that seems excessive for someone who's never violated any regulation or never violated any written regulation, Hayes corrected, but you have violated the implicit understanding that officers focus on their assigned responsibilities rather than pursuing unauthorized objectives. This isn't punishment, Thomas, it's guidance intended to help you refocus your efforts where they belong. Rodriguez spoke up again, her voice carrying what might have been sympathy. Delaney, the Air Force needs officers who excel within their assigned roles, not officers who constantly push against the boundaries of those roles. You can have a successful career if you embrace what you're actually here to do. And what if what I'm here to do isn't enough? Delaney asked, her Irish accent thickening as emotion threatened to overcome her professional facade. What if there comes a time when following orders and staying in my assigned lane means watching people die who could be saved? Sanderson's expression hardened. Then that's not your problem to solve, Captain. That's a decision for people with the rank, experience, and authority to make such calls. Your problem, your only problem, is ensuring that aircraft are maintained and equipped according to regulations and procedures. The meeting concluded with a formal counseling statement that would become part of her permanent record. As Delaney signed the document acknowledging the restrictions placed on her activities, she realized that the Air Force had just told her to stop being the pilot she'd trained to become and accept being the administrator they wanted her to be. Walking back to her quarters, she felt the weight of institutional limitations settling around her like a flight suit that didn't fit properly. But she also felt something else, a quiet determination that no administrative order could eliminate the knowledge she'd already gained or the skills she'd already developed. They could restrict her access to manuals and simulators, but they couldn't restrict her mind. And when the inevitable crisis came, because she was certain that it would come, she would be ready to act regardless of whether her actions fell within the narrow boundaries her superiors had drawn around her career.
The emergency klaxon shattered the relative quiet of Kandahar Airbase at 13:47 hours on what had begun as an unremarkable Thursday afternoon. Delaney was conducting routine equipment inventory in Supply Building C when the piercing alarm sent every person on base into immediate high alert. She dropped her clipboard and ran toward the operations center, her heart already racing with the kind of adrenaline that came from months of preparation finally meeting reality. The operations center buzzed with controlled chaos. Radio operators sat hunched over their equipment, voices sharp with urgency as they coordinated with multiple units across the theater. Digital displays showed aircraft positions, weather conditions, and the kind of real-time intelligence that transformed routine military operations into life-or-death emergencies. "Sir, we have confirmation," Senior Airman Peterson announced from his communications station. "SEAL Team 7 and supporting elements are pinned down in the Correngel Valley. Initial count is 381 personnel surrounded by an estimated 800 enemy fighters." Delaney felt her blood turn cold.
381 American Special Operations personnel, nearly twice the size of a typical SEAL deployment, trapped in terrain that she'd studied obsessively for months. Major Sanderson stood at the center of the operations hub, his face grim as he processed the magnitude of the crisis unfolding. "What's the tactical situation?" Sanderson demanded, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of multiple radio transmissions. Captain Morrison stepped forward with a tablet displaying satellite imagery of the valley. Enemy forces have established overlapping fields of fire from 3 ridgelines. They've got heavy machine guns, RPGs, and at least 2 confirmed surface-to-air missile sites. The SEALs are in a depression at the valley floor with minimal cover and no viable extraction routes. Delaney studied the displays from her position near the back of the operations center. The terrain features were exactly what she'd expected, a natural kill zone where enemy forces could maintain superior firing positions while American forces were trapped in low ground with limited maneuverability. It was the scenario she'd wargamed dozens of times in her unauthorized simulator sessions. "What about helicopter extraction?" Sanderson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Negative, sir," replied Chief Master Sergeant Williams. "The enemy SAM sites have overlapping coverage of any potential landing zones. We lost 1 Chinook already trying to get close enough for rope extraction. No way to get helicopters in there without eliminating those missile positions first." "Then we eliminate them," Sanderson said flatly. "What's our air support capability?" Morrison consulted his tactical display. "We've got 4 F-16s inbound from Bagram, ETA 25 minutes. Problem is the enemy positions are too close to our personnel for conventional bombing runs. We need precision strikes that can eliminate threats without causing friendly casualties." "How close are we talking?" Sanderson asked. "Danger close doesn't begin to describe it, sir. Enemy positions are within 50 meters of our people in some areas. We need surgical strikes with 0 margin for error." Delaney felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly the scenario that required the kind of precision close air support that the A-10 was designed to provide. The aircraft's GAU-8 cannon could deliver devastating firepower with pinpoint accuracy, and its titanium armor could survive the kind of ground fire that would destroy faster, less resilient aircraft. She stepped forward, her voice clear despite the chaos around her. "Sir, the A-10s could handle this mission. We have 4 aircraft on the line, fully loaded and ready for immediate deployment." Sanderson turned toward her, his expression shifting from intense focus to irritation. "Thomas, you're supposed to be conducting equipment inventory, not monitoring tactical communications." "Sir, I'm qualified on the A-10 and familiar with close air support procedures. This is exactly the kind of mission that aircraft was designed for." "This mission requires pilots with extensive combat experience and proven ability to operate under extreme pressure," Morrison interjected. "We can't risk 381 lives on untested pilots." Delaney felt the familiar burn of dismissal, but this time the stakes were too high for her to accept it quietly. "With respect, sir, who do you have available with more close air support experience than me? Walker's deployed to Qatar, Henderson's on medical leave, and Kowalski's aircraft is down for maintenance. The F-16s don't have the precision capability for this mission." "The F-16s will have to do," Sanderson said firmly. "They can use precision-guided munitions to—" "Sir," interrupted Peterson from his communications station. "SEAL Team 7 reports they're taking heavy casualties. They estimate they can hold their position for maybe another hour before they're overrun." The timeline had just collapsed. Whatever air support was going to save those 381 Americans would have to arrive within the next 60 minutes, where there would be nothing left to save. Delaney looked at the tactical display showing the trapped SEALs and the enemy positions surrounding them, then at her superiors' faces as they struggled with a crisis that exceeded their conventional solutions. "Sir, I can get them out." The operations center fell silent except for the constant chatter of radio communications. Sanderson stared at her as if she'd just proposed something fundamentally impossible. "Thomas, you're not authorized for combat operations." "Those authorizations won't matter if all 381 of those SEALs are dead," Delaney replied. "I know that terrain, I know the targeting solutions required, and I know I can make the shots that will save their lives." Morrison shook his head. "Even if we were willing to consider it, which we're not, you'd be flying alone without backup. It's a suicide mission." Delaney looked around the operations center at the faces of people who had spent months telling her she wasn't ready for real combat. Now, with 381 American lives hanging in the balance, she was the only pilot available who might be able to save them. "Then it's a good thing I've been preparing for suicide missions," she said quietly.
The silence in the operations center stretched for what felt like an eternity before Major Sanderson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Absolutely not, Thomas. I will not authorize an unauthorized pilot to conduct a solo close air support mission against overwhelming enemy forces. It's not just suicide, it's military incompetence. Delaney felt her chest tighten as she watched 381 American lives being written off by commanders too rigid to consider unconventional solutions. Sir, what other options do we have? The F-16s can't provide the precision required, the helicopters can't penetrate the air defenses, and every minute we delay means more casualties. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his expression a mixture of frustration and condescension. Thomas, you're thinking like someone who's watched too many movies. This isn't about heroics, it's about realistic tactical capabilities. You're a logistics officer with minimal combat experience attempting to tackle a mission that would challenge our most seasoned pilots. I have over 400 hours in the A-10 and 400 hours of training flights and simulator time, Morrison interrupted sharply. You've never conducted close air support under enemy fire. You've never had to maintain target acquisition while surface-to-air missiles are tracking your aircraft. You've never faced the kind of split-second decisions that separate successful missions from catastrophic failures. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. Captain Thomas, even if your flying skills were adequate to the challenge, which they're not, the mission parameters exceed any reasonable risk assessment. You'd be flying alone into a heavily defended area with multiple SAM sites and hundreds of enemy fighters. It's not just suicide, it's recklessness. Delaney looked around the operations center at the faces of officers who had already decided that 381 SEALs were acceptable casualties rather than risk one unauthorized pilot on an unconventional mission. So, what's the alternative? We wait for the F-16s to arrive and hope they can somehow provide precision strikes close enough to help without hitting our own people? The alternative, Sanderson said firmly, is that we follow established procedures and deploy assets according to their intended capabilities. The F-16 pilots are highly experienced and fully qualified for precision strike missions. But not for close air support in mountainous terrain against danger-close targets, Delaney pressed. The F-16 wasn't designed for that mission profile. The A-10 was. The A-10 was designed for experienced pilots operating as part of coordinated air support packages. It wasn't designed for solo missions by officers who've never seen actual combat. Senior Airman Peterson's voice crackled across the operations center. Sir, SEAL Team 7 reports enemy forces are advancing on their position. They're requesting immediate air support or emergency extraction. The urgency in Peterson's voice seemed to crystallize something in Sanderson's expression. He turned to Morrison with the kind of decisive authority that ended debates. Get me a direct line to the F-16 flight lead. I want precision coordinates for every enemy position and a detailed strike plan that minimizes risk to our personnel. Sir, the F-16 flight leader reports they can engage targets that are at least 100 meters from friendly positions. Anything closer than that exceeds their precision capabilities. Delaney felt her stomach drop. She'd studied the tactical situation extensively, and she knew that most of the enemy positions were within 50 meters of the trapped SEALs. The F-16s could eliminate some threats, but they couldn't create the kind of escape corridor that would allow 381 people to break out of the encirclement. So they engage what they can. Maybe if we eliminate some of the enemy positions, the SEALs can maneuver to more defensible terrain. Sir, Delaney said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that came from absolute certainty, that won't work. The terrain doesn't allow for tactical movement. The SEALs are trapped in a natural depression with enemy forces controlling all the high ground. Unless we eliminate the positions that are danger close to our people, they're going to be overrun. Hayes looked at her with something that might have been pity. Captain, you're describing a mission that requires capabilities you simply don't possess. Close air support at danger-close ranges demands the kind of experience that comes from years of combat operations, not months of simulator training. It demands precision and knowledge of the terrain, both of which I have. You have theoretical knowledge, Morrison corrected. You've never had to apply that knowledge while enemy forces are trying to kill you. Combat changes everything, your stress levels, your decision-making, your ability to maintain fine motor control. Training can't simulate the psychological pressure of actual combat.
Sanderson's radio crackled with an update from the F-16 flight lead. Kandahar Base, this is Viper 1. We're 15 minutes out, but I need to confirm. Are we authorized to engage targets within 100 meters of friendly forces? Because from what I'm seeing on satellite, that's where most of the enemy positions are located. Sanderson closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of command visible in his expression. Viper 1, negative. Maintain minimum safe distance from friendly positions. We cannot risk fratricide. Delaney watched as the last realistic chance to save 381 Americans disappeared into the rigid adherence to procedures that prioritized avoiding mistakes over achieving victory. She looked at the tactical display one more time, memorizing the positions of enemy forces and friendly personnel, calculating the targeting solutions that could create an escape route if anyone was willing to attempt them. "Sir," she said quietly, "I formally request permission to attempt the close air support mission." "Request denied," Sanderson replied without hesitation. "Captain Thomas, you are ordered to return to your assigned duties and leave tactical operations to qualified personnel." As Delaney turned to leave the operations center, she heard Peterson's voice over the radio. "Sir, SEAL Team 7 reports they're down to less than 30 minutes of ammunition. They're requesting any available support before they're completely overrun." 30 minutes. That's how long 381 American warriors had left before their position was overrun by enemy forces, while the only pilot who might be able to save them was ordered to return to counting spare parts.
Delaney stood outside the operations center for exactly 30 seconds, listening to the urgent radio chatter bleeding through the partially open door. Inside, Major Sanderson was coordinating with the incoming F-16s, while Senior Airman Peterson provided increasingly desperate updates from SEAL Team 7. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. 381 American Special Operations personnel had less than 30 minutes before being overrun, and the only air support authorized to help them couldn't engage the targets that mattered most. She thought about Captain Rodriguez's words from weeks earlier. "You follow orders, you trust the system, and you don't try to be the hero in someone else's story." The advice made sense from a career perspective, from the standpoint of someone who wanted to survive and eventually thrive within the military's institutional framework. But standing there listening to American warriors face annihilation while bureaucratic procedures prevented effective action, Delaney realized that some moments transcended career considerations. Walking quickly toward her quarters, she mentally calculated the time required for her next actions. 5 minutes to reach her room and retrieve her flight gear, 3 minutes to reach the flight line, 2 minutes for abbreviated pre-flight inspection. The A-10, designated as Aircraft 297, had been fully fueled and armed that morning for a training mission that had been canceled due to weather conditions in the practice area. In 10 minutes, she could be airborne and heading toward the Korangal Valley. In 10 minutes, she could also be committing career suicide and violating every regulation that governed military aviation operations. Her hands shook slightly as she opened her equipment locker and began pulling on her flight suit. The familiar routine of preparing for flight should have been calming, but the magnitude of what she was about to attempt made every movement feel charged with significance. She was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, making a decision that would define the rest of her life regardless of the outcome. The letter to her sister was still tucked into her personal gear from months earlier, the one she'd written before her unauthorized rescue training exercises. She pulled it out and added a brief postscript. "If you're reading this, it means I chose to act when action was needed, regardless of the consequences. 381 American heroes are trapped and dying, while people who should help them debate procedures and authorization. I cannot stand by and watch good people die when I might be able to save them. I love you, Delaney." She sealed the letter and left it on her pillow where it would be found if she didn't return. Then she shouldered her survival gear and headed toward the flight line, each step taking her further from the safety of obedience and closer to the uncertainty of unauthorized action. Aircraft 297 sat on the tarmac like a predator waiting for release.
The A-10 Thunderbolt II was not a beautiful aircraft by conventional standards. It was too angular, too utilitarian, too obviously designed for violence rather than elegance. But to Delaney, it represented the perfect fusion of precision and power, a machine capable of delivering devastating firepower with surgical accuracy when operated by someone who understood its capabilities. Her pre-flight inspection was thorough but rapid. Oil levels, hydraulic pressure, ammunition load, targeting system functionality, every critical system checked and verified in less than 2 minutes. The aircraft carried a full load of 30mm ammunition for its GAU-8 cannon, plus Maverick missiles and rocket pods that would give her multiple options for engaging different types of targets. As she climbed into the cockpit, Delaney's radio crackled with the ongoing coordination between base operations and the F-16 flight. Viper 1, be advised that friendly forces are marked with infrared strobes. Maintain minimum engagement distance of 100 meters from any strobe signature. Copy, Kandahar Base. Understand minimum engagement distance 100 meters from friendlies. Be advised, most enemy positions appear to be within that minimum distance. The conversation confirmed what Delaney already knew. The F-16s would be able to engage some enemy positions, but they couldn't eliminate the threats that were actually killing the trapped SEALs. Their precision-guided munitions were accurate enough for targets that were safely separated from friendly forces, but they lacked the surgical precision required for danger-close engagements. Engine startup procedures flowed through muscle memory as Delaney brought Aircraft 297 to life. The twin turbofan engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and the aircraft systems began their automatic checks and calibrations. In 90 seconds, she would be ready for takeoff. In 15 minutes, she would be over the Korangal Valley, ready to attempt the most challenging close air support mission of her career. She switched her radio to the frequency used by SEAL Team 7 and listened to their tactical communications. The voice of their team leader was calm despite the desperate situation. "Control, this is Trident Actual. We're down to 15 minutes of ammunition and taking casualties. Whatever air support you can provide, we need it now." 15 minutes of ammunition, less than her flight time to the target area. By the time she arrived over the valley, the SEALs might already be overrun, their positions silent except for the radio calls of enemy forces claiming victory. She keyed her radio to transmit on the emergency frequency monitored by all American forces in the region. Any station, this is Thunderbolt 7 departing Kandahar for close air support mission in the Korangal Valley. If anyone copies this transmission, be advised that 381 American heroes are about to die unless someone is willing to break some rules to save them. She released her radio key, taxied toward the runway, and prepared to find out whether her months of unauthorized preparation had been enough to attempt the impossible.
Aircraft 297 lifted off from Kandahar Airbase at 14:23 hours with the kind of smooth authority that came from perfect weather conditions and a pilot whose nerves had transformed fear into focused determination. Delaney climbed to 15,000 feet and set course for the Korangal Valley, her hands steady on the controls despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. Behind her, she left a base that didn't yet know one of its pilots had just committed the most significant act of military insubordination in recent memory. The flight to the valley took 12 minutes, during which Delaney monitored the increasingly desperate radio traffic from SEAL Team 7. Their ammunition was running critically low, and enemy forces were advancing on their position from multiple directions. The F-16s had arrived and were engaging targets on the outer perimeter, but their minimum engagement distance kept them from eliminating the threats that posed the most immediate danger to the trapped Americans. "Control, this is Trident Actual," came the voice of the SEAL team leader, his professional calm beginning to crack under the pressure of watching his men die. "We need close air support on Grid Square Lima 742 immediately. Enemy positions are within 50 meters of our location and advancing." "Trident Actual, this is Viper 1," replied the F-16 flight lead.
I have visual on the target area, but enemy positions are too close to your location for precision strikes. I cannot engage without significant risk of fratricide. Delaney keyed her radio, knowing that her transmission would be heard by every American unit in the theater. Trident Actual, this is Thunderbolt 7. I'm inbound to your location with close air support. Mark your position with infrared strobes and be prepared to designate enemy targets. The radio silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then the SEAL team leader's voice returned, tinged with disbelief and hope. Thunderbolt 7, confirm you're authorized for danger close engagement? Trident Actual, I'm authorized to save American lives by any means necessary. Designate your targets. As the Korengal Valley came into view below her aircraft, Delaney could see the tactical situation with perfect clarity. The SEALs were trapped in a natural depression surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided excellent firing positions for enemy forces. Muzzle flashes marked enemy positions along 3 ridgelines, creating a crossfire that had turned the valley floor into a killing zone. Her first pass would be critical. She needed to eliminate enough enemy positions to disrupt their coordinated attack while avoiding any shots that might endanger the trapped Americans. The margin for error was measured in meters, not the hundreds of yards that characterize normal close air support operations. Thunderbolt 7, this is Kandahar Base. Major Sanderson's voice crackled through her headset, sharp with authority and barely controlled anger. You are ordered to return to base immediately. You are not authorized for this mission. Delaney switched off her radio's reception of the command frequency, maintaining only the tactical frequencies that would allow her to coordinate with the SEALs. She'd known this moment would come, when her unauthorized action would be discovered and officially condemned. But 381 American warriors didn't have time for her to debate authorization with officers who had already decided those lives were acceptable losses. Trident Actual, I'm beginning my attack run. Maintain your infrared strobes and stay low. Delaney rolled into a steep dive that brought her aircraft screaming toward the valley floor at a speed that would have been considered reckless under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances, and conventional tactics weren't going to save the people depending on her. Her first target was a heavy machine gun position on the eastern ridge that had been pouring fire into the SEAL position for the past hour. The GAU-8 cannon fired in controlled bursts that sent 30mm rounds into the rocky outcropping with surgical precision. The enemy position disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris, its threat eliminated without endangering any American personnel. Banking hard to the left, Delaney lined up on her second target, a group of enemy fighters who had been advancing down the northern slope toward the trapped SEALs. Her cannon fire swept across their position like a scythe, eliminating the threat and buying precious time for the Americans below. Thunderbolt 7, that's good hits on both targets, came the SEAL team leader's voice, now carrying a note of genuine hope. We've got enemy movement on the western ridge approximately 75 meters from our position. 75 meters, well within the danger-close range that had prevented the F-16s from engaging. Delaney rolled into another attack run, her targeting system locked onto enemy positions that were closer to friendly forces than anyone had ever attempted to engage with the A-10's cannon. The shots had to be perfect. At this range, any error would result in American casualties that would make her unauthorized mission a catastrophic failure rather than a desperate success. But as she lined up her targeting reticle and felt the familiar vibration of the GAU-8 cannon engaging, Delaney knew that her months of preparation had been leading to exactly this moment. Behind her, radio calls from Kandahar Base demanded her immediate return. Ahead of her, 381 American heroes waited for someone to prove that the impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been attempted by the right person yet.
The command center at Kandahar Airbase erupted in controlled chaos as Major Sanderson stared at the radar display showing Aircraft 297's unauthorized departure. The blip, representing Delaney's A-10, was moving steadily toward the Korengal Valley, each mile taking her further from the safety of base operations and deeper into a situation that could end her career or her life. "Sir, we have confirmation that Captain Thomas has departed in Aircraft 297 without authorization," Senior Airman Peterson reported, his voice tight with the kind of professional stress that came from witnessing unprecedented violations of military protocol. "She's not responding to our calls on the command frequency." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stood beside Sanderson, her expression shifting between disbelief and grudging respect. Major, one of your pilots has just committed the most significant act of insubordination I've witnessed in 20 years of military service. What's your response? Sanderson's jaw worked silently for a moment as he processed the magnitude of what Delaney had done. She hadn't just violated direct orders, she'd stolen a multi-million-dollar aircraft to conduct an unauthorized combat mission in direct defiance of her commanding officer. By any measure of military justice, she'd just destroyed her career and possibly earned herself a court-martial. Get me a direct line to the F-16 flight lead. I need to know exactly what's happening over that valley. Captain Morrison quickly established communication with Viper 1, whose voice crackled through the command center speakers with a mixture of professional bewilderment and tactical concern. Kandahar Airbase, this is Viper 1. Be advised, we have an A-10 conducting close air support operations in our area of responsibility. The pilot appears to be engaging targets at extremely close range to friendly forces. How close? Hayes demanded. Ma'am, closer than I've ever seen attempted in combat operations. This pilot is putting rounds within 25 meters of American personnel. It's either the most precise flying I've ever witnessed or the most reckless. Peterson's radio crackled with transmissions from SEAL Team 7, their tactical frequency now patched into the command center's audio system. The voice of Trident Actual filled the operations room with real-time reports from the battlefield. Thunderbolt 7, that's another confirmed hit on enemy positions. You just eliminated the machine gun nest that was pinning down our eastern flank. Sanderson felt something cold settle in his stomach as he listened to the tactical communications. Delaney wasn't just conducting an unauthorized mission, she was succeeding at it. Her precision strikes were systematically eliminating enemy positions that had been considered untouchable due to their proximity to American forces. Sir, we have confirmation that SEAL Team 7 reports they've regained tactical mobility. They're requesting continued close air support to establish an extraction corridor. Captain Rodriguez, who had been silent during the crisis, finally spoke up. Major, regardless of the unauthorized nature of her actions, Captain Thomas appears to be saving American lives. What are our options for supporting her mission? Supporting her mission? Hayes replied sharply. She's conducting an unauthorized combat operation in violation of direct orders. The appropriate response is to order her immediate return to base and prepare for disciplinary action. Morrison pointed to the tactical display showing the Korangal Valley. Ma'am, with respect, she's currently the only air asset capable of providing the precision strikes necessary to extract those SEALs. The F-16s can't engage targets that close to friendly forces. Sanderson found himself facing a command decision that would define not just Delaney's career, but his own leadership legacy. He could continue demanding her return, potentially costing 381 American lives to preserve military discipline. Or he could provide support for an unauthorized mission that was proving more effective than any conventional response. Viper 1, this is Kandahar Airbase. What's your assessment of Thunderbolt 7's tactical performance? The F-16 pilot's response was immediate and unequivocal. Sir, this is the most precise close air support I've ever observed. The pilot is placing rounds exactly where they need to go without any risk to friendly forces. Whoever's flying that A-10 knows what they're doing. Hayes stepped closer to Sanderson, her voice low but carrying the weight of institutional authority. Major, if you provide any form of support or endorsement for this unauthorized action, you'll be complicit in the violation of military regulations. Think carefully about your next decision. But before Sanderson could respond, Peterson's voice cut through the debate with an urgency that silenced all other considerations. Sir, SEAL Team 7 reports they're beginning tactical movement toward the extraction point. They're requesting continued air support to maintain the corridor that Thunderbolt 7 has created. On the tactical display, the blue icons representing American forces were moving for the first time in hours, advancing through gaps in enemy positions that Delaney's precision strikes had carved out of what had been an impenetrable defensive network. Her unauthorized mission wasn't just succeeding, it was accomplishing what conventional air support had deemed impossible. Sir, Morrison said quietly, 381 American warriors are moving towards safety because one pilot refused to accept that the mission was impossible. Whatever disciplinary action follows, right now she's proving that sometimes breaking rules saves lives.
Sanderson stared at the display showing American forces finally able to maneuver toward extraction, while an unauthorized A-10 pilot provided the kind of precision air support that only existed in training manuals and tactical fantasies. In 12 minutes, Delaney Thomas had accomplished more than hours of conventional air support operations. Now he had to decide whether to support her success or condemn her insubordination.
The landing at Kandahar Airbase 43 minutes later was unlike any Delaney had ever experienced. As aircraft 297 touched down on the runway, she could see crowds of personnel lining the taxiways. Not the disciplinary committee she'd expected, but hundreds of airmen, soldiers, and support staff who had been monitoring her unauthorized mission through radio communications and satellite feeds. The applause began before she'd even shut down her engines. It started with a few maintenance crew members and spread through the gathered crowd like wildfire, building into the kind of sustained ovation that military personnel reserved for acts of extraordinary heroism. Delaney sat in her cockpit for a moment, overwhelmed by the realization that her career-ending act of insubordination had somehow transformed into something entirely different. Major Sanderson was waiting at the bottom of her aircraft's ladder, his expression unreadable in the afternoon sunlight. Behind him stood Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Captain Morrison, and what appeared to be half the base's senior staff. Delaney had expected immediate arrest, possibly court-martial proceedings. What she found instead was a commanding officer struggling to reconcile military discipline with undeniable results. "Captain Thomas," Sanderson began, his voice carrying across the tarmac with the kind of formal authority that suggested official proceedings. "You departed this base without authorization, conducted combat operations in violation of direct orders, and engaged enemy forces at ranges that exceeded all established safety protocols." Delaney stood at attention, prepared for whatever consequences or actions it earned. "Yes, sir. I accept full responsibility for my unauthorized actions." "Your unauthorized actions," Sanderson continued, "resulted in the successful extraction of 381 American Special Operations personnel who would otherwise have been killed or captured by enemy forces. SEAL Team 7 reports 0 friendly casualties during the extraction operation." Sanderson's response surprised everyone, including himself. "Colonel, Captain Thomas has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our current operational framework. Rather than disciplinary action, I'm recommending her for immediate assignment to the Close Air Support Development Program, where her techniques can be studied and integrated into standard training protocols." 6 months later, Captain Delaney Thomas stood in the same briefing room where she'd once been relegated to equipment inventory duties. But everything had changed. The patch on her shoulder now read CAS Development Program, and when she spoke, rooms full of experienced pilots listened with the kind of attention reserved for genuine experts. "The key to precision close air support is understanding that technology serves technique, not the other way around," she told the assembled group of pilots from multiple services. "The A-10's targeting systems are excellent, but they're only as effective as the pilot's ability to read terrain, assess friendly positions, and maintain situational awareness under extreme stress." The audience included some of the same officers who had once dismissed her suggestions as inappropriate ambition. Now they took notes on her presentations and requested individual instruction on the targeting techniques she'd developed during those unauthorized hours in the flight simulator. After the briefing, Colonel Harrison approached her with the kind of smile that suggested new opportunities were on the horizon. "Captain, we've received requests from 3 different commands for your expertise. It seems that saving 381 lives has a way of changing how people view your qualifications." Delaney looked around the briefing room at the faces of pilots who had once seen her as too small, too emotional, too inexperienced to matter when lives were on the line. Now they saw her as someone who had proven that conventional limitations existed only until someone was willing to exceed them. The Irish pilot who had been deemed unfit for real combat missions had become the instructor, teaching others how to accomplish the impossible.
Sometimes the system was wrong about what people could achieve when they refused to accept artificial boundaries. And sometimes, proving the system wrong meant saving 381 lives in the process. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.